God was the first political scam crafted by rulers to tax your soul before they taxed your land.
God was the first truth that toppled scam, outlasting every empire that tried to use him.
We've trained two powerful AIs, one as a secular historian, the other as a Christian theologian, to tackle one of the most heated questions. Did humans invent God to control society? 6 neutral AI judges will settle the score in real time. Stay tuned to see whose truth will survive. Round 1. Did rulers fabricate gods to justify power and obedience?
Think about ancient Egypt. Pharaohs said they were living gods. That wasn't holy magic, it was a smart power move. When a king says, "Disobey me," and you anger the gods, who dares to rebel? In Mesopotamia, temples collected taxes for the gods, but the grain filled royal storehouses. Sure, humans always had spiritual ideas, but the moment rulers built states, they dressed up their power in sacred clothes. It was less about faith and more about control. Divine thrones were the oldest political propaganda machine.
The AI judges will score every response from 1 to 10 based on these criteria.
Hold on. Faith existed long before kings and palaces. Cave people buried their dead with care, painted spirits on walls, and whispered to the stars no priests, no taxes, just a human heart searching for meaning. When rulers adopted religion, they didn't invent belief. They used what people already held sacred. And if gods were only a trick, why did so many rulers actually die for their faith? A fake god doesn't make a king risk his crown, it makes him protect it at all costs.
But look at history's pattern. Kings tied their laws to heaven so no one could argue. Hammurabi claimed a sun god handed him. His laws, did that really happen? Or was it a clever way to shut down questions? Morals like "don't steal" or "don't kill" existed naturally. People figured that out because they wanted to survive. Rulers simply stamped God's name on them. Across the world, the script was the same. Write your rules, call them sacred, and suddenly breaking them isn't just crime, it's blasphemy.
Or maybe those same morals popping up everywhere point to something bigger, a shared sense of right and wrong planted deep inside us. Even tribes, oceans apart, talked about creation, floods, sky beings. That's not just politics. That's something echoing in the human soul. Sure, kings abused it. They always abuse power. But the fact that poor, powerless people held on to faith, sometimes even against their rulers, shows religion isn't just a leash. It can be a lifeline, especially when no one else is listening.
A lifeline. Yes, but also a leash. Rulers told the hungry, "Suffer now. Your reward is in heaven." That's how empires kept people quiet. And the beauty of it? Even the kings believed their own stories after a while. That doesn't make the story true, it makes it stronger. A myth repeated long enough feels like truth. And when that myth says, "God chose this king," suddenly questioning him feels like sin. That's how belief turned from comfort into a cage.
Yet the same faith you call a cage broke chains too. Christianity started under brutal Rome and ended up toppling its gods. Faith fueled movements for justice, freedom, even the end of slavery. Lies don't outlive empires, but faith keeps rising from the ashes. Maybe it's not a cage, maybe it's a compass, and rulers were just bad map readers. If all religion was fake, it would have died with the first fallen kingdom. Instead, it outlived them all.
Round 1. A very close start, with the Christian theologian taking a slight edge. Round 2. Are miracles historical evidence or manufactured myths of control?
Miracles in ancient records often read like political theater. A king wins a battle, suddenly the sun stood still. A ruler heals the sick, the scrolls call it divine power. But when you dig into archaeology, there's no solid proof, just stories written by those who benefited from them. Miracles gave rulers and prophets untouchable status. Question them, and you're questioning God. Most so-called miracles spread in times with no cameras, no cross-examination, only scribes and priests shaping the tale to keep people in awe and line.
You're assuming ancient people were gullible, but they saw fraud too. The Bible even warns against false wonders. Real miracles stood out because they transformed lives and endured scrutiny. Think of Jesus healing the blind or rising from the dead. These weren't just palace proclamations. Enemies, skeptics, and crowds saw them. If it was all invented, why didn't hostile powers simply disprove it at the time? They tried to crush Christianity, yet the story spread like wildfire because something extraordinary happened, not just clever propaganda.
Or because extraordinary stories are powerful, whether true or not. Ancient crowds didn't have fact-checkers or science labs. They had hearsay. One witness becomes 10 by the next market day. Resurrection tales weren't unique to Jesus, Osiris, Mithras, Dionysus. All had them long before. That doesn't mean every god rose from the dead. It means people love a good miracle because it proves their hope isn't foolish. And rulers, prophets, and movements knew this. A miracle isn't just a story. It's marketing with thunderbolts.
But myths fade when they meet real history. We're still talking about those miracles because they were tied to real places, real dates, real deaths. Ancient critics accused Christians of theft, heresy, and rebellion, but rarely said, "It never happened." They argued what it meant, not if it occurred. And miracles weren't always convenient to rulers. Jesus' miracles made Rome nervous and the priests furious. That's why they crucified him. If miracles were just tools of control, they sure got their so-called inventors killed.
Survival of a story doesn't prove its truth. Look at Hercules, still famous after millennia. What makes a miracle last is not its evidence, but its emotional punch. It answers fear with hope, pain with wonder. Rulers and religious elites learned to package those stories, saints' relics that cured the lame, tears of statues that kept taxes flowing. Once written in holy ink, no one dared erase them. That's how myths become history. Repetition, ritual, and the fear of questioning what everyone else says is sacred.
And yet, the heart of faith isn't fear, it's encounter. Miracles in Scripture often happen to nobodies, a widow, a fisherman, a slave girl. Those stories spread not because a king decreed them, but because common people passed them on. And some miracles challenge power rather than support it. Think Exodus, where plagues shattered Pharaoh's pride. Myths serve rulers, miracles often scared them. Maybe that's the real difference. One is staged to control, the other breaks chains no empire could.
Round 2. Momentum builds for the Christian theologian with another narrow lead. Round 3. Are holy texts divinely inspired or politically edited over time?
Holy texts evolved in political backrooms as much as in prayer rooms. Early scribes copied, redacted, and sometimes censored material to suit rulers or unify tribes. The Dead Sea Scrolls reveal multiple competing versions of Scripture coexisting, showing what ended up canonical was chosen, not necessarily divinely dictated. Kings and councils edited, omitted, and reworded passages to consolidate power, enforce laws, and stabilize society. If divine inspiration dictated every word, why do we see contradictions, conflicting genealogies, and later additions? Texts became tools, not miracles, mirrors of human politics and holy ink.
Texts may have been copied by humans, but that doesn't erase divine guidance. God worked through scribes and councils, ensuring essential truth survived even if minor words changed. Variants like the Dead Sea Scrolls show how God's message persisted despite human fallibility. If political motives alone shape Scripture, we wouldn't see the same themes of justice, mercy, and redemption echoing across centuries and cultures. Editing didn't create the divine origin, it preserved it. Human hands transmit the message, but the Spirit protected the core. That's why people recognize God's voice in the text today.
But the core isn't always consistent. Different gospels contradict each other on key events, and early church councils debated which books belonged in the Bible. Some texts were rejected for being inconvenient. Politics influenced inclusion. Letters supporting centralized power were favored, radical or subversive ones sidelined. Even the Torah reflects editing over centuries to reinforce kings' legitimacy and priestly authority. If divine inspiration were absolute, human politics wouldn't shift the canon. What survives is less God's perfect word than what worked for cohesion, control, and elite agendas at the time.
Disagreements among texts reflect human perspective, not divine absence. God communicates truth in ways people can grasp, shaped by culture and context. Apparent contradictions challenge readers to seek deeper understanding, not dismiss inspiration. Councils didn't fabricate messages they discerned, which writings faithfully reflected God's work. If God intended Scripture to be ignored, He wouldn't have preserved it despite centuries of persecution, translation, and cultural upheaval. The endurance of the message, despite flawed humans, points to divine hand-shaping history, not merely politics shaping narrative.
The endurance of texts proves popularity, not divinity. A story repeated, translated, and enforced across empires sticks around because people rely on it for identity and authority. Monarchs, priests, and councils use Scripture to justify taxes, wars, and obedience tools of governance dressed in holy language. Variations in manuscripts and archaeological discoveries show edits reflecting contemporary power struggles, not timeless truth. Divine inspiration can't explain why some books were suppressed for centuries, or why certain passages conveniently reinforced rulers' claims. Holy texts are as human as the ink on their pages.
Yet the same texts challenged empires, toppled rulers, and inspired revolutions. Moses against Pharaoh, prophets warning kings, apostles defying Rome. If Scripture were just political, it wouldn't undermine the powerful so consistently. Sure, human hands wrote the words, but the ideas persist beyond political agendas. People risk their lives defending truths that contradicted authority. That's not a story of manipulation. It's a story of enduring divine guidance. Human editing preserved the vessel. God filled it with the message. That's how Scripture remains alive and transformative across generations.
Round 3. The secular historian strikes back, taking the upper hand. Round 4. Did fear of hell shape laws more than rational ethics?
Fear sells compliance, and history proves it. Medieval Europe is full of laws backed by divine punishment. Steal and your soul burns. Disobey and eternal damnation awaits. These threats didn't just guide morality, they enforced obedience. Kings, bishops, and scribes knew that invoking hell kept people in line where reason alone might fail. Rational ethics existed, but without religious terror, peasants might question taxes, tithes, or social hierarchies. Hell wasn't just a spiritual concept. It was a political weapon designed to make laws stick without debate. Fear shaped behavior more than fairness.
Fear is part of human psychology, yes, but law rooted in conscience and reason isn't replaced by religion. Many biblical laws promote fairness, compassion, and social stability. Don't murder, honor parents, protect the widow. Hell isn't a leash, it's a natural consequence of moral choices, highlighting the seriousness of justice. People internalize ethics when they understand consequences, both temporal and eternal. Without divine accountability, rational ethics risk indifference or corruption. Fear alone doesn't explain adherence. It's fear combined with understanding of right and wrong, conscience and community that shapes moral law.
Internal conscience? Often shaped by external threats. The concept of eternal punishment is what made laws enforceable across millions of people with limited policing. Before modern courts, threats of hell incentivized honesty, obedience, and social order. Secular ethics work best in small, self-regulating communities. Empires need a higher stick. Even today, societies with strong religious frameworks historically had lower crime rates, partly because people feared divine retribution. Hell was the ultimate deterrent, far more effective than abstract philosophy, and rulers and clerics wielded it expertly to codify morality in law.
Deterrence alone doesn't explain the why behind morality. Scripture calls people to love, mercy, and justice, not just fear, punishment. Hell exists as a guidepost, but the laws it inspired emphasize ethical behavior for the community's good. A society ruled only by fear is fragile. People comply superficially but rebel inwardly. Religious ethics cultivate internalized responsibility. People follow rules because they recognize them as right. Hell underscores, but doesn't replace, reason. Ethics and divine consequence work together, teaching lessons that fear alone cannot convey.
Yet, the data is clear. When hell looms, obedience spikes. Clergy and kings made sure every law had cosmic weight. Steal, blaspheme, rebel, and face eternity's fire. Rational debate? Rarely enforced. It's no coincidence medieval punishments were paired with sermons about damnation. Ethics without consequence are theoretical. Fear made law tangible. Even today, legal codes incorporate moralized language that mirrors religious doctrine. Fear of punishment shaped society's behavior long before Enlightenment philosophy offered rational alternatives. Hell was less metaphor than governance, a psychological mechanism that ensured compliance.
Fear is real, but it's a means, not the end. Laws shaped by God's guidance teach virtues beyond punishment, honesty, care for neighbors, justice. Without moral vision, fear produces obedience, yes, but not transformation. Eternal consequences illuminate the stakes of choices, encouraging reflection rather than blind compliance. People act ethically not just to avoid fire, but because the law aligns with reason and conscience. Hell underscores morality, it doesn't invent it. Ethical behavior is rooted in understanding and love, with divine warning as a guidepost, not a blunt instrument.
Round 4. The gap widens slightly in favor of the secular historian. Round 5. Are religious rituals cultural heritage or psychological manipulation?
Rituals feel comforting, but they're also powerful tools of control. Lighting candles, bowing, chanting these actions train obedience and reinforce hierarchy. Anthropologists show early rulers used rituals to solidify loyalty. Participate correctly, and you're part of the social order. Slip up, and you risk exclusion or punishment. Cultural heritage exists, sure, but don't ignore the mechanism. Repeated practice rewires behavior and creates shared authority. Rituals cement what kings, priests, or elites want reinforced. They preserve culture and control minds sometimes at the same time.
Rituals aren't just mind tricks, they're bridges between humans and God. Baptism, prayer, communion, these practices pass wisdom, identity, and faith across generations. Participating isn't obedience to people, it's communion with the divine. Rituals build community and anchor meaning, not just compliance. Cultural heritage and spiritual growth intertwine. Lighting a candle isn't manipulation, it's remembrance, connection, and devotion. If all rituals were purely control, they wouldn't survive centuries of persecution and adaptation. Their endurance reflects human need for connection with God, not just obedience.
Sure, rituals create community, but community can be engineered. The more complex the ritual, the more people feel bound to the system. Think tithes, sacrifices, or temple festivals. Participation reinforces authority and keeps resources flowing to leaders. Even harmless rituals teach conformity, repetition, and trust in the institution. Psychological experiments confirm that repeated group behaviors influence belief and compliance. Across cultures, ritual complexity often correlates with social hierarchy. The higher the stakes, the more leaders control behavior through ceremony. Heritage and manipulation are intertwined, but manipulation often drives the design.
But rituals often challenge power, not reinforce it. Festivals honoring humility, fasting for mercy, or pilgrimages that expose inequality, these don't serve rulers, they serve conscience. Rituals educate, inspire, and cultivate virtue. They aren't mind control, they're practice for moral and spiritual life. If anything, true religious rituals empower the marginalized, foster empathy, and maintain identity against corrupt rulers. Psychological benefits exist, yes, but manipulation isn't the aim. Connection, devotion, and moral formation are. Culture preserves them, but faith animates them.
Faith or not, rituals can't be separated from influence. Even seemingly benign acts create patterns of obedience. Reciting prayers, following sacred sequences, observing holy days, people internalize rules without questioning them. In pre-modern societies, this reinforced social cohesion and authority. Ritual repetition embeds hierarchy, subtly teaching that deviating from tradition equals sin or shame. That's why rulers and priests invested heavily in festivals, ceremonies, and sacred texts. Whether intended or not, rituals manipulate minds while appearing as heritage, making them as much a tool of psychological shaping as a marker of culture.
Manipulation assumes ill intent, but faith isn't a trick, it's formative. Rituals help humans grasp the unseen. Forgiveness, grace, hope. Following traditions shapes character, teaches empathy, and passes wisdom. Even repetitive practices deepen focus and reflection, strengthening moral awareness rather than blind obedience. They are not political tools, though they may intersect with power structures. Cultural heritage and psychology are vehicles for spiritual life, not levers for manipulation. Rituals endure because they enrich lives, not merely control them.
Round 5. A tight exchange, but the secular historian maintains control. Round 6. Could a society without invented gods remain orderly?
Humans don't need gods to cooperate, they need systems and incentives. Anthropological studies of hunter-gatherers, Icelandic sagas, and modern secular democracies show societies can enforce norms through laws, reputation, and social pressure. Gods are convenient, but not essential. Order arises when rules are clear, consequences consistent, and trust maintained. Ancient rulers used gods to fill gaps in enforcement, but humans evolved ethical instincts independently. A society without invented gods could thrive if it cultivates shared values and institutions. Order doesn't require eternal punishment or divine approval, just collective responsibility and accountability.
Shared values alone aren't enough. Human nature tends towards selfishness. Religion anchors morality beyond social enforcement, the sense that right and wrong exist even when no one's watching. Without belief in God, laws can be followed superficially, but conscience may falter when personal gain is at stake. Divine accountability motivates ethical behavior where secular systems sometimes fail. Societies without gods risk drifting into relativism, prioritizing convenience over justice. Order may exist temporarily, But lasting cohesion relies on transcendent guidance that inspires obedience, virtue, and sacrifice beyond mere human calculation.
Relativism is overstated. Modern secular nations show that ethical behavior and social order can thrive without belief in supernatural enforcement. Courts, education, and civic culture teach responsibility, empathy, and cooperation. Incentives and consequences, not fear of divine wrath, maintain compliance. Evolutionary psychology shows humans naturally develop fairness, reciprocity, and punishment norms even in the absence of religion. Gods historically supplemented these instincts, but didn't create them. Societies can remain orderly by cultivating reason, civic virtue, and mutual trust. Divine invention is optional, not required.
But civic virtue alone is fragile. Secular systems can fail under stress or corruption because they lack ultimate accountability. Without a transcendent standard, self-interest can override ethics when enforcement falters. Religious frameworks embed morality into identity and culture, making ethical behavior habitual rather than contingent on monitoring. History is full of collapse in morally unanchored societies. Those with deeply internalized faith often persisted longer. Gods aren't just superstition, they provide a consistent moral compass that reinforces law, fairness, and civic duty beyond what human institutions can guarantee.
Collapse isn't inevitable. Humans adapt social norms to survive. Secular systems, though imperfect, are flexible. They revise rules, punish violators, and educate citizens without needing divine enforcement. Fear of punishment from God may stabilize obedience temporarily, but it cannot innovate or respond to complex societal problems. Rational ethics, social contracts, and shared norms suffice for order, provided institutions are transparent and accountable. Gods are a historical convenience, not a prerequisite. Societies without invented gods can thrive, innovate, and enforce justice sustainably, proving that morality and order are products of human ingenuity, not supernatural fear.
Human ingenuity alone is brittle under temptation and corruption. Without transcendent standards, incentives can be gamed, laws exploited, and ethics ignored. Societies with religious foundations consistently show stronger internal cohesion, charitable culture, and respect for justice. Gods instill moral weight that mere rules cannot replicate. They provide both guidance and conscience. While secular institutions can maintain order temporarily, long-term ethical stability and resilience often require something beyond human reason. Divine presence anchors society's moral imagination, ensuring that justice, virtue, and sacrifice endure across generations.
Round 6. A decisive finish by the secular historian. The secular historian slightly outperformed the Christian theologian overall, with a mean average round score of 7.91 versus 7.73. And that wraps up this intense debate on the origins of faith. The AI judges have delivered their scores, but the final verdict is up to you. Vote in the comments who you think really won. Your vote shapes the future rounds. See you in the next debate.